3 days after a ship sank into the Atlantic Ocean, a team of divers descended into the dark water with a grim mission. They weren't expecting to rescue anyone. In fact, they believed every single person on board had already died. Their job was simply to recover bodies from the wreck resting hundreds of feet below the surface. Inside the twisted metal corridors of the sunken ship, the water was silent and black, illuminated only by the narrow beams of their flashlights. One diver slowly swam through the wreckage, passing floating debris and lifeless bodies drifting in the water. Then something happened that no one on that rescue team would ever forget. Out of the darkness, a human hand suddenly reached out and grabbed the diver's arm. The diver panicked instantly. His heart raced, because the hand that grabbed him was alive. That hand belonged to a 29-year-old cook named Harrison Okene. Against all logic and every expectation, he had somehow survived inside a sunken ship for nearly 3 days at the bottom of the ocean. The story began several days earlier, in 2013, off the coast of Nigeria. A tugboat known as the Jascon 4 was working in rough waters, helping stabilize a large oil tanker in the open sea. The crew aboard the vessel had done this kind of work many times before. Storms were common in that region, and the men on board were experienced. But that night, the weather grew worse than anyone expected. Powerful waves slammed against the small vessel again and again, while strong winds howled across the ocean. Inside the ship, Harrison Okene was doing his usual job in the kitchen preparing food for the crew. Unlike the other men, Harrison wasn't a sailor or engineer. He was simply the cook, responsible for keeping everyone fed during long days at sea. Late that night, everything changed in an instant. Without warning, a massive wave crashed into the side of the tugboat with tremendous force. The ship lurched violently and began tilting to one side. At first, the crew thought it might stabilize again. But within seconds, the angle grew worse. Objects slid across the floor. Equipment crashed against the walls. The men scrambled to hold on to anything they could. Then another powerful wave struck the vessel. In a horrifying moment that lasted only seconds, the entire tugboat flipped upside down. Harrison was in the bathroom when the ship capsized. The lights instantly went out, plunging everything into total darkness. Water burst into the room as the boat rolled over. Harrison was thrown against the walls while icy seawater rushed through the corridors of the ship. Disoriented and terrified, he struggled to understand what had happened. The boat had flipped completely upside down and was rapidly sinking. Furniture, metal tools, and debris floated past him in the black water while the ship filled with the ocean around it. Instinct took over. Harrison knew he needed to move quickly or he would drown. Feeling his way through the darkness with his hands, he tried to navigate the ship's corridors, while the water level rose higher and higher. Each breath felt heavier as panic crept into his mind. Somewhere around him, the rest of the crew was fighting for survival too, but the chaos and darkness made it impossible to see anyone. Within minutes, the tugboat sank completely and settled on the ocean floor far below the surface. Inside the wreck, Harrison finally found a small pocket of trapped air in one of the compartments. It wasn't large, but it was enough for him to keep his head above the water. Only then did the horrifying reality sink in. The ship was lying on the bottom of the ocean and he was trapped inside it. The cold water surrounded him. The darkness was absolute, and there was no way to know if anyone else had survived. Hours passed slowly in that suffocating silence. Harrison could hear the creaking metal of the wreck as the pressure of the ocean pushed against the hull. Occasionally he heard objects drifting in the water or bumping against the walls. At first he hoped those sounds meant someone else was alive somewhere inside the ship, but eventually he realized something far more disturbing. The sounds came from the bodies of the other crew members drifting through the flooded corridors of the wreck. The situation was terrifying beyond imagination. Harrison was alone in the darkness, surrounded by freezing seawater and the wreckage of the ship that had once been his workplace. Even worse, he knew the air pocket keeping him alive was limited. Every breath used precious oxygen that could run out at any moment. If rescuers didn't arrive soon, he would suffocate long before anyone ever found the wreck. Time became impossible to measure in the darkness. Day and night meant nothing hundreds of feet underwater. Harrison prayed constantly, speaking out loud in the darkness just to hear a human voice. At times he drifted into exhausted sleep while standing in the cold water. Hunger gnawed at him, and the freezing temperature drained his strength. Occasionally, floating debris drifted into the small compartment where he was trapped. Among the items he found was a bottle of soda floating nearby, which became the only liquid he could drink. Somehow he survived through the first day, then the second. By the third day, his body was weak and shaking, but he still refused to give up hope. Unknown to him, a recovery team had finally located the wreck of the Jascon 4. Divers were sent down to investigate, but their mission was not a rescue. Everyone on the surface believed that no one could possibly survive inside a ship that had been underwater for days. The divers were simply sent to recover the bodies of the crew. As one diver moved carefully through the dark corridors of the wreck, his flashlight beam illuminated floating debris and lifeless bodies drifting through the flooded rooms. The atmosphere inside the ship was eerie and silent. Then suddenly, in a narrow corridor, something moved in the darkness. Before the diver could react, a hand shot out and grabbed his arm. The diver was so shocked he nearly jerked away in panic. For a brief moment he thought a corpse had somehow moved. But when he turned his flashlight toward the figure, he realized something almost impossible. A living man was standing there in the darkness of the wreck. It was Harrison. The diver immediately signaled to the rest of the team. They quickly gave Harrison oxygen and began preparing him for the dangerous ascent to the surface. After nearly 3 days trapped inside a sunken ship at the bottom of the ocean, Harrison Okene was finally rescued alive. Even the experienced divers could hardly believe what had happened. Survival under those conditions was almost unheard of. Against all odds, Harrison had endured freezing water, darkness, exhaustion, and the terrifying silence of the deep ocean. What should have been a tragic recovery mission had turned into one of the most unbelievable survival stories ever recorded at sea. One fascinating fact about sunken ships is that once a vessel sinks, it doesn't simply stay the same forever. Deep underwater, the ocean slowly begins to reclaim everything. Tiny organisms, bacteria, and sea creatures start breaking down metal, wood, and fabrics. Over time, entire ships can collapse under their own weight as corrosion eats through the structure. What once was a powerful machine navigating the surface eventually becomes part of the ocean floor. Another eerie detail is how quiet everything becomes underwater. When a ship sinks, the interior quickly fills with water, but pockets of trapped air can remain for hours or even days depending on the structure of the vessel. Divers who explore wrecks often report hearing strange creaking sounds as the metal shifts under pressure. These noises can echo through the flooded corridors, creating an unsettling atmosphere that feels almost alive. The ocean itself also plays tricks with light. Sunlight can only penetrate a limited distance into the sea, and deeper wrecks exist in almost complete darkness. Occasionally, beams of light cut through the water, illuminating dust-like particles floating everywhere. These particles are often pieces of rust, sediment, or organic matter slowly drifting through the wreck like underwater snow. Another interesting phenomenon is something called marine snow. This is a constant fall of organic debris from the surface of the ocean, tiny fragments of dead organisms, plankton, and waste material. Around shipwrecks, marine snow collects in large amounts, slowly covering the wreck like a blanket over the years. Some shipwrecks even become artificial ecosystems. Fish, coral, and other marine animals use the wreckage as shelter. What was once a human-made structure eventually turns into a thriving underwater habitat. Schools of fish swim through broken windows, while coral grows across railings and hulls, transforming the wreck into a living reef. And perhaps the most chilling part is how preserved some things can be underwater. In cold, deep waters with little oxygen, objects inside wrecks can remain almost untouched for decades. Personal belongings, tools, and even furniture sometimes stay exactly where they were when the ship went down, frozen in time at the moment of disaster.